Good morning, everyone. So I realized that we skipped the Mishnah, that we went from Perek Yud, Mishnah Gimel, chapter 10, Mishnah 3, and we skipped chapter 4. So I'm going to go back to chapter 4 right now, to a very short Mishnah, and then we'll continue from where we left off yesterday. So if you recall, we had a case where if you put a hot loaf of bread on top of a barrel of wine and it absorbs the aroma of the wine, not any kind of flavor or taste from the wine, but an aroma of the wine, we had an argument in the Mishnah, Mishnah Gimel, as to whether Reicha Milsa, whether aroma is considered a matter of substance or not. So this Mishnah is a continuation of that. Tanur shesikai b'kamoin shel truma. You have an oven, and this oven was heated up with kamoin. They translate as cumin of truma, v'afabai, and you baked bread in it. Hapas muteres, the bread is permissible. Shein tam kamoin, we don't have here the taste of the kamoin truma. We don't have the taste of the truma cumin. Elareach kamoin, we have the aroma of the cumin. And therefore, we're saying our Mishnah is following the opinion that reicha lav milsahi, that aroma is not a matter of substance, and therefore the fact that the bread has absorbed the aroma from the cumin is not going, even though the cumin was truma, it's not going to make the cumin, it's not going to make the bread give it a status of truma, a status of meduma, of a mixture of truma and chulin. Now, what is interesting to point out here is that there is a case like this. The Yad Avram on this question. A Mishnah states that if peels of arla fruits, arla, for the first 3 years of the produce of a tree, it's forbidden to have benefit from. So the Mishnah states that if peels of arla fruits were used as fuel for baking truma bread, that bread becomes forbidden. Not because of any aroma the bread absorbed, but because of the very fact that the arla was used as fuel. This is based on the principle, yesh shvach eitzim b'pas, the improvement of the wood is contained in the bread. Okay, so you use these arla fruits to bake the bread becomes forbidden to have benefit from it. It becomes forbidden, not a benefit from it, like the arla itself. Because we have a principle, the improvement of the wood is contained in the bread. That means what this wood, with this fuel, which was arla, it created the bread. We see the improvement of the wood in the bread. The bread was improved. It was able to grow, it was able to rise, it was able to be baked because of this arla peels. And therefore, the benefit of the wood, of the fuel, of that arla is seen in the bread. And that's why the bread is forbidden. So therefore, the question is, therefore, here too, even if we do not consider the truma aroma to be significant, the bread should nevertheless be forbidden because it was baked with truma fuel, right? That's how the bread was baked. It was baked with truma fuel. This way over there, we see the improvement of the wood in the bread. In the case of arla, we should see the improvement of the wood, of the fuel, which is truma here, in this bread, and it should be considered a mixture with truma. And the answer that's given is that the only reason over there's any kind of issue of the improvement of the wood in the bread is because we're talking about arla, and arla is asar b'hana. It's forbidden to have benefit from it. So therefore, the bread that was baked from arla, and arla is forbidden to have benefit from, so you can't have benefit from the bread either. But there's no prohibition on a non-Kohen to have benefit from truma. If a Kohen decides to light a candle for me from his truma oil, and I want to use it, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not allowed to eat truma from not a Kohen, but I'm allowed to benefit from it. And therefore, here, when you're using the truma cumin as your fuel for the oven, the fact that now there's a benefit from truma isn't a problem because benefiting from truma is no prohibition. And therefore, the bread is permissible since we say reicha lav milsa, the aroma is not a matter of substance. And therefore, the fact that the oven was heated up through truma, and that's how the bread was baked, makes no difference. Okay, that's Mishnah Dalet. Now we're back to where we are, which is Mishnah Perek Yud, Mishnah Zayin. Okay, here we go. Zay say chulin. You have olives of chulin, not truma olives. Shekavashan and zay say truma. You pickle them with olives of truma. That's the scenario. We are pickling chulin olives with truma olives. Rashi says, the Bartanura says that pickling here means in a saltwater solution. That is how you pickle things, in a saltwater solution. And therefore, so now the question here is, if in this solution, do we say, because they're pickled together, do we say that the chulin olives are going to absorb flavor from the truma olives? That's the question here. The Rambam says that we don't have to be talking about pickling in the sense of using salt water. We could be talking about soaking, where it's just sitting in water together. But we'll just, for our purposes, we'll use the word pickling. So that's the case here. You pickled the chulin olives with truma olives. So the Mishnah says like this: Petzuei chulin and petzuei truma. If we're talking about crushed olives of chulin with crushed olives of truma, petzuei chulin mishleimei truma, we're talking about crushed olives of chulin with whole olives of truma. Oibemei truma, or you're putting the crushed olives into truma water, meaning water. In the first two cases, you are pickling the olives together. In this case, the crushed chulin olives are just being put in water that truma olives were pickled in. So we say, Asr. These chulin olives become forbidden because we say in all the cases, they absorbed taste from the olives. But whether we're talking about that the olives of truma are whole or crushed, or we're talking about just water, that the pickled water, the water that the truma olives were pickled in, they're not in there anymore, but it's the water that they were pickled in. In all these cases, the crushed olives, we say, absorb the flavor of the truma olives that they were either with, or that flavor is already in the water, and it's taking it out and it's absorbing it from the water. In whatever case that may be, when we're talking about that the chulin olives were crushed, they are forbidden. They're meduma. They are chulin olives that have absorbed flavor of truma. Aval shleimei chulin and petzuei truma muter. If we're talking about the whole chulin olives, even with crushed olives of truma, that's what was combined together. That's what was pickled together. Muter, it's permissible. The point of the Mishnah is that when we're talking about a whole olive will give off flavor, but it will not absorb flavor. The only way the olive is going to absorb the flavor is if it is crushed. It's already broken. If it's not broken, even though the olive of truma was broken and therefore it's broken, it's going to give off more flavor. It's definitely more prone to give off flavor, give off the taste. Nonetheless, if the chulin olive is whole, it does not absorb. That's what the Mishnah is saying. If the chulin olives were broken, they'll absorb even from a whole olive of truma, or just from water that truma olives were already pickled in. That water has the flavor of the truma in it, and now putting in the broken olives will now absorb that flavor, that taste. But if we're talking about that the olives are whole, the whole olives, even together with broken truma olives, crushed truma olives, whole olives will not absorb, and therefore they remain permissible. That is what the Mishnah is telling us. Now, two things here. First of all, a couple of things here rather. First of all, in the case where you have the, let's say, the crushed chulin olives together with the whole or broken truma olives. So we have here a mixture of the two, right? That's if you're pickling them together, we have a mixture of the two. And therefore we say like this: in the case of a mixture of olives, in the case of a mixture of same species, we say if you have 100 times more chulin than truma, it nullifies the truma. So were I to have 100 times more of the chulin here than the truma when I'm pickling them together, then I'm not going. Then it's going to be then the truma olives are buttal anyway, and it won't make any kind of difference. Won't make any kind of difference. Here we're talking about when you are pickling the olives together, that there is less than 100 times more. And since they're the same species, it's that the truma is not going to be buttal. Now we have to figure out if the chulin olives are to absorb the taste of the truma olives, if they're broken or not. Now, What's interesting is that our case, the way the Mishnah lays out the case is that the chulin olives were pickled together or put into the water in which truma olives were pickled. The Rambam in his commentary on the Mishnah actually says that this same law applies to any liquid that exudes from any type of truma. And therefore, if chulin olives were soaked in liquid containing truma flavor of a food other than olives, they would also be permitted to a non-Kohen if that truma flavor could be detected. Meaning, the Mishnah's case was olives, and we're talking about olives and olives, the same species, the same taste. But the Rambam says that even if, let's say, this water of truma, right, that this water of truma that you pickled something of truma in it, right? The Rambam says it's not the case. Not only going to be in the case of olives. It could have been some other truma food that you pickled, and the flavor, the taste of that food went into that water. And now again, if the olives are going to be the broken olives are put into that water, then they will have the potential of absorbing the taste. The only thing is that now, if there be a way of doing this, if we could figure out whether that water actually gives taste into the olives, then already let's have a Kohen come and taste it. Then we can detect, okay, is there taste here or not? If there's taste here, it's forbidden. If there's no taste here, it's not forbidden. But the point is that this case and the discussion of the Mishnah is not only a case of olives and olives. The Rambam says it's also talking about it could be crushed olives and pickled together with something else or some other kind of pickled water of some other truma food. Just so there too, the question is going to be, so first of all, if the olives are whole, it won't make any difference. If they're broken, and therefore now there is the potential of absorbing, or they will absorb, the question is now, did they absorb enough to be able to say that the taste of the truma is in them? Okay, so we ask a kohen to go ahead and taste it and see if it has the taste in it or not. But the point is that the Mishnah is not only talking about a case of olives and olives, it's talking about olives together with any other truma food. Okay. Now, I just want to conclude with an interesting question that, again, we're not going to really get a very clear answer, but it's just a very interesting question, a very basic question on the Mishnah. And that is that whether we're talking about that you pickled it or you soaked it, there is a concept called kavish. Kavish means soaked, pickled. Okay, whether you soak it in water or soak it with salt water, you soak something, the fact that you're soaking it, as we see here, has the ability to go ahead and remove the taste, the taste from what's being pickled in there. And depending on the situation, as we have in our Mishnah, it's going to go ahead and absorb it. Now, there's a principle, kavish k'mavushal dami, which means when you pickle something, it's like cooking it. That's the whole reason why, by the soaking, we're saying here that the truma olives will exude the taste, and depending on what shape the olives of chulin are in, they're going to absorb the taste. It's all because of the fact that soaking accomplishes what cooking does. The same way cooking, causes the food heat, causes the food to give out flavor or to absorb flavor. Kavish, pickling, does the same thing. But the principle is kavish k'mavushal, which means when you pickle, it's like cooking it. Now, if you were to go ahead and take the olives of truma and olives of chulin, whole olives, and cook them together, the whole olives of chulin would become a dumah. There's no question about that. Cooking, we know, would have the whole olives of chulin absorbing the taste from the olives of truma. So if the rule is that kavish, pickling, is like cooking, then why here are we saying that if you pickle the olives together and the chulin olives are whole, that they're not going to absorb from the truma olives? Why? Kavish k'mavushal. Pickling, soaking is like cooking. And there's a discussion about this. And at the end, one of the answers that's given is, and it's not an answer that I fully understand, but this is the answer that's given, and that is that when it comes to truma, the rules of expelling, of exuding taste and absorbing taste work differently than in other cases. So, or at least in the case here of olives. So that would mean like this. So in our case, when you have the whole olives pickled together with other olives, even if the truma olives are crushed, whole olives being pickled will not absorb the taste from the truma olives. That is a rule by truma. Were we to be talking about, let's say, for instance, that the chulin olives were being soaked together with some kind of non-kosher food, not truma, non-kosher food, arla, whatever it may be, the halach would be differently. The whole olives would become forbidden by being soaked together. Okay? And if, let's say, we're talking about actually cooking the olives, even if they're both olives, chulin olives and truma olives, if we're actually cooking them, even by truma, the whole olives would become forbidden. Right? If we're talking about actual cooking of the whole olives of chulin with the olives of truma, it would become forbidden. For some reason, by truma, if we're talking about olives and we're talking about kavush, we're talking about soaking, and we're talking about olives and olives, it's not going to absorb if it is whole while it's kavush. If we're talking about the whole olives with some other forbidden food, well, actually, I shouldn't say olives, truma. If we're talking about whole olives of chulin being soaked with truma, the whole olives do not absorb. For some reason, by truma, that's the way it works. But if we're talking about the whole olives of chulin with some other type of forbidden food, or actually cooking the whole olives of truma with the whole olives of chulin, then the whole olives would become forbidden. Prohibition that if you chance upon a bird's nest with the mother and the chicks or the eggs, that you cannot take the mother together with the children. There's also a positive command involved in this, and that's where the Chavetz Chaim in the section of the positive commandments elaborates more on this. Shene'amar, as it states, Ki yikare, if you chance upon a nest, lo yitzika cha'em al habanim, you cannot take the mother with the children. So there's a prohibition. You come upon a bird's nest, again, there are different details about the nest, where it was. It's talking about kosher birds. That if you find this nest and the mother is there together with the chicks or with the eggs, she's in contact with the nest, you cannot take you cannot take the mother bird with the young. You can't take the mother bird and the young. There's a positive commandment to send away the bird, and then you can take either the eggs or the chicks. This applies in all places at all times, both by men and by women. Next, prohibition against leaving any kind of stumbling block, any kind of source of accident that could cause danger to life in one's house. Shenemar, as it states, you shall not place blood in your house. This is where the Torah commands that if, let's say, you have a roof and it's a roof that you go on, that you need to put a fence around the roof to make sure that nobody falls off. And the same thing, let's say you have a pit in your backyard and somebody could, God forbid, fall into the pit and get killed. You got to put a fence around it. You cannot have within your property things that could cause an accident that can endanger someone's life. So that's the prohibition. The positive commandment is you've got to create the protection. The negative, the prohibition is to leave that kind of stumbling block in your house. This applies in all places at all times, both by men and by women. Have a wonderful day.